Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Tales of Herding Gods based on novel. So let's start. Various battles were simulated in his mind, but no matter how he improved, he couldn't change his defeat. Sometime later, Qin Mu roused his spirit and stood up. In the storm in his mind, he had finally managed to defeat Village Chief with his new sword skill, so he rushed over with excitement. Village Chief, once more. Village Chief beamed. Okay. Qin Mu rushed over and executed his improved sword skill. He then flew high up into the air and left a trail of blood in midair before crashing into the chicken coop. A dozen hen dragons clucked and rushed over fiercely. Qin Mu immediately rose into the air, and the hen dragons also flapped their wings to fly. Their feathers were like swords and they spewed fire at him. Mountains and rivers suddenly appeared in midair and flooded the dozen hen dragons. After one move, they fell bare from the sky, and their feathers fluttered everywhere. Qin Mu landed on the ground, stunned. The hen dragons clucked and ran back into the chicken coop, closing the wooden door and not daring to show their faces again. Cluck cluck, the old hen clucked in a stern tone. Qin Mu waved his hand and a few traces were left on the wooden door by his sword chi. The chicken coop was in a flurry. Qin Mu was stunned and looked at his hand. When had he become so powerful? Mu is so suave, he can finally defeat chickens. Cripple praised. Qin Mu's face turned slightly red, but he continued to concentrate on comprehending what he felt. Suddenly, Mute threw a sword pellet over and signaled, "Abba! Abba! Ah! Qin Mu thanked Mute. What Mute meant was that he had just created a sword pellet and he should try it out. He gripped the sword pellet tightly, and his vital chi rushed into it. Countless sword lights instantly flew out, and they were the rays of swords which seemed to have no substance. They could warp according to his will and be as natural as his vital chi. Qin Mu grasped the sword pellet and gave a punch forward. The sword rays in the sword pellet instantly transformed into a huge dragon which rushed out and roared through the small village. Qin Mu jumped in shock, and Village Chief also jumped in shock before giving an angry stare to Mute. Qin Mu retracted his fist, and his mind moved slightly. He could feel as if the sword pellet that he was gripping tightly was melting. He took a firmer grip of it, and the sword rays transformed into a huge smithing hammer. When he smashed down with a powerful force, he created a huge pit in the ground. He leaped up, and knife lights appeared. Sun on East Sea 1,000 layers wave had knife lights which were like a wave with 1,000 layers and a sun rising into the sky. The knife skill was then retracted as the sword rays transformed into a huge brush which swept into the sky to draw a painting of a flood dragon which soared into the sky and transformed into a long spear that was 12 yards long. Qin Mu grabbed onto the spear in midair and stabbed forward. The corners of Village Chief's eyes twitched furiously as he stared at Mute with an unpleasant gaze. Mute immediately retreated into his smithy and didn't dare to show his face. The spear vanished, replaced by countless sword lights which formed vast mountains and rivers. Sword-treading mountains and rivers. Qin Mu landed on the ground with surprise and delight. This sword pellet that Mute had forged was to his liking. He must have extracted the gold chi from the mysterious iron and mysterious gold, choosing chi and forego the form. Even though this sword pellet was a sword pellet, it had a myriad of changes. His fist skills, spells, and sword skills could all be unleashed, and there was no obstruction at all. Mute's forging skills were already close to the path. Qin Mu kept the sword pellet, but he didn't use it to challenge Village Chief. Mute popped his head out and gave two signals, drawing a line across his head. What he meant was that this sword pellet could definitely get rid of Village Chief who was using the 5 elements realm. Village Chief blew up and the wrinkles on his face twitched. If Qin Mu was to really use the sword pellet, the power of his sword skill would increase exponentially, and he might really be able to defeat him. Qin Mu shook his head. Grandpa Mute, Village Chief is not using a weapon so I can't use one as well, otherwise he won't accept that he lost. Mute rolled his eyes and gave him a "you are hopeless" look. Qin Mu continued to concentrate on comprehending and improving his sword treading mountains and rivers. However, the result of each clash was the same. Every time he failed, he would have new comprehension which allowed him to perfect his sword treading mountains and rivers more and more. However, he still failed after each improvement. Finally, after one more failure, Qin Mu discovered that he could no longer improve his move. With his current knowledge and experience, he could no longer upgrade his skill. He was stunned for a moment, then suddenly came to realization. He executed one of the moves of sunset sword skills, sunsets on surging river, and his sword skill was like the surging river water that had a red sun half set in the heart of the river. From the red sun, countless sword lights would burst forth. He had only practiced this move once or twice, but the power he had unleashed was incomparably astonishing. It was like he had spent 100 years polishing this skill. Qin Mu was then convinced, and he knelt down in front of village chief to carry out the rites of taking him as his master. Village chief smiled. "Get up, there ain't so many rules. I shall teach you the other moves of sword picture in no time, and with your current attainment, it won't be hard for you to learn them." "Mute, you rogue, you still have the face to come out and congratulate." Everyone from disabled elderly village came out to congratulate village chief for finally having a successor and Qin Mu for succeeding village chief's legacy, becoming the current human emperor. However, village chief wasn't pleased with Mute and Qin Mu wasn't really happy with being a human emperor. After the commotion, Qin Mu continued to learn sword skills from village chief. Sword picture was a set of sword skills founded by village chief and not the sword skills of Hall of Human Emperors. The first form, sword treading mountains and rivers, was the most complicated sword skill that Qin Mu had seen so far. It was even more complicated than the first form of Dao sword, yin-yang come and go within 2 modes. However, sword treading mountains and rivers was the simplest sword skill in the set of sword picture. The second form, sword of founding emperor, was several times more complicated than sword treading mountains and rivers, and it was extremely difficult to master. When Qin Mu had first learned sword treading mountains and rivers, he had spent over a dozen days to do so. After experiencing eternal peace empire, his horizons had broadened. He had also received teachings from woodcutter's rock and comprehended unity technique, which had then fused with overlord body 3 elixir technique. Because of all this, his aptitude and comprehension had improved quite a bit as well. However, learning sword of founding emperor still took him over 20 days. Only then did he understand village chief's intentions. If they hadn't competed with sword treading mountains and rivers, he would have needed a much longer time to learn sword of founding emperor. He might have even taken a year and a half to master this move. Village chief had squeezed his wisdom out so Qin Mu could learn sword of founding emperor in just over 20 days. Since he was already at half step to sword skill from sword technique, he could learn it, even if it was strenuous. However, the third form, Calamity of the Apex Emperor, reached the extremes of technique and transformation which a sword skill could reach, so it was not something Qin Mu could master. He could memorize move, but if he wanted to execute it, he would have to comprehend the marvel of it first. But at that time, no matter how much he concentrated on comprehending, he couldn't understand the marvel of Calamity of the Apex Emperor completely. He was limited by the width of his horizons and knowledge. With narrow horizons and lack of knowledge, his foundation wasn't good enough, so even if village chief taught him, he wouldn't be able to learn or use the skill. Qin Mu could only drop his thoughts about mastering it and concentrate on Sword of Founding Emperor. Sword of Founding Emperor, Sea of Blood. Qin Mu had heard the young village chief chanting these phrases after walking out of Death's painting in a small and empty village in Eternal Peace Empire. At that time, he had sensed a strange emotion hidden within the sword skill. Sword treading mountains and rivers that village chief had taught him had an implicit charm and mood to it. It was the feeling of heroes gathering to slay gods and devils, while Sword of Founding Emperor had the mood of commemorating martyrs. The two moods were different, not matching one another at all. Because of this, even though Qin Mu had learned the two sword forms, he still couldn't understand the different feelings behind them. The vital chi needed for Sword of Founding Emperor was astonishing, since one move had depleted almost half of his cultivation. If a person wanted to execute this move, it was impossible to do so without dense vital chi. Village chief, how many moves are there in sword picture? Qin Mu asked. Village chief said calmly, only 8 moves. Qin Mu was astonished. 8 moves? So few. One move in each realm. Village chief narrowed his eyes. That's why there are only 8 moves. Qin Mu counted with his fingers: spirit embryo, 5 elements, 6 directions, 7 stars, celestial being, life and death, divine bridge. No matter how he counted, there were only 7 realms, so why were there 8 moves? A step above divine bridge realm is the level of gods. Could village chief's 8th move be the move of a god? His heart thumped violently. Other than comprehending sword skills these days, he competed with village chief and borrowed the pressure village chief exerted on him to improve himself. He was trying to incorporate Imperial Preceptor's 3 basic sword forms into Sword of Founding Emperor. With an existence like village chief guiding him, he naturally improved by leaps and bounds. Village chief's sword skills were close to the path and to him, so it didn't matter if there were 14 or 17 forms. However, to Qin Mu, adding Imperial Preceptor's 3 sword forms could increase the power of his move by quite a lot. As the days passed, his attainments in sword skills increased rapidly. Qin Mu seemed to have returned to the past. Training his fists with Old Ma daily, competing in knife skills with Butcher, stealing from each other with Cripple, learning to forge with Mute, cultivating his god's eyes with Blind, refining medicine with Apothecary, painting with Deaf, and tailoring with Granny. Even though he went to bed exhausted every day, it was very fulfilling. After returning to disabled elderly village from his journey away, the things that Old Ma, Butcher, and the rest taught him were much more profound. In the past, they had only taught him entry-level techniques, but now that Qin Mu's horizons had broadened, they could teach him more profound abilities. Because of this, all the elders in disabled elderly village were very gratified. Granny's heart devil is acting up again. A commotion rose in the village, and Cripple called out in a loud voice, "Blind, come quickly. Granny Sai has recovered her true appearance, so I can't lay my hands on her. You can't see, so you shall deal with this little demoness." At the time, Qin Mu was competing knife skills with Butcher. When he looked over after hearing the commotion, he saw a woman walking out from Granny Sai's room. Upon seeing her, his heart throbbed uncontrollably a few times. He felt as if he had been ruthlessly struck by invisible arrows. Granny Sai had revealed her true appearance and even dressed herself up meticulously. The clothes on her body were no longer the old drabs she usually wore, but were tailored from exquisite silk. They fit her perfectly, showing off her good figure. Her makeup was also applied meticulously. With her bright eyes and white teeth, her face was lightly powdered and her astonishing beauty was on full display. She wore a bracelet on her left wrist that was made of green jade and pearl earrings that were shaped like tears hanging from her ears. When she walked out, the winter suddenly seemed to turn into spring and summer. Even though the weather was still freezing, everyone in the village felt the warmth of summer blossoming. She walked out like a goddess descending from paradise into the mortal world, stunning everyone in the village. Apothecary felt inferior and covered his face in shame to walk away. Deaf dropped his brush onto the table and hurriedly took out a bronze mirror to tidy himself. Mute ran to the water cauldron in a hurry to wash his face while Old Ma chanted the names of Buddha to suppress his heart devil. Butcher used his pig slaughtering knife to shave his favorite full beard while Cripple just shut his eyes and shouted for Blind to come over. Village chief was also a little flustered and turned his head around to shout, "Blind, Blind." Blind walked over towards Granny Sai with his bamboo cane and asked calmly, "Are you Cult Master Li or Granny Sai?" Cripple said angrily, "Of course she's Cult Master Li, that pervert. Granny Sai can't suppress him anymore. You can't see her true appearance, so you shall be the one to suppress Cult Master Li." A rough and old voice came from Granny Sai's mouth which smiled flirtatiously. "My wife is no longer a match for me, and now she's the one being suppressed. Look at me, aren't I beautiful?" She smiled very sweetly, obsessed with her own beauty. When she spoke next, her voice was still rough, but her tone was very gentle, and her breath smelled like irises and orchids. "When I married my wife, I realized that I was no fit for such a beauty like her. And it wasn't only me like that, none of the stinky men in this world were fit to be with her. However, I still decided to marry her, and I knew that she was willing to marry me since I was her master. She couldn't resist it. I knew she was preparing to kill me the night we would consummate our marriage, but I was willing to let her kill me. That was because she raised her wrist and examined her flawless white skin that was even whiter and more exquisite than fine white tallow jade. Even the flawless bracelet was serving merely as a prop, unfit to be on this wrist. Cult Master Li covered the mouth and giggled. That was because I was too envious of her. I didn't want to marry her, I wanted to become her. After she killed me and I became her, wouldn't I gain the best of both worlds? Blind walked over with his cane. Even though the woman before him was extremely beautiful, it didn't have any influence on Blind. He said hurriedly, Cult Master Li, you're too much. Have you forgotten that you once were a man? What is there to miss about being a stinky man? Cult Master Li's body was charming when it rolled its eyes at him. Damn it, Blind. Both your eyes and heart are blind, you don't know the benefits of being a woman at all. Don't block my way, you can't block me alone. I'm leaving, I shall live another lifetime as a woman. Qin Mu shut his eyes tightly to not look at the beauty, but he could resist opening his eyes almost right away. Cult Master Li, you're getting a little sick in the mind. As a fellow cult master sacred teacher of Heavenly Saint Cult, I despise you as a human. Blind propped himself on his bamboo cane while smiling. Well said, Mua. Cult Master Li shot a glance at Qin Mu, and Qin Mu instantly felt his mind turning blank. There were no more thoughts in his mind other than that the woman was really beautiful. Talk some more and I'll kill you to become sacred cult master once again. Cult Master Li laughed while pinching the orchid-shaped fingers. Qin Mu's heart thumped violently. He felt that if such a beautiful woman wanted his life, he would be willing to give it to her. No, no. She's Granny Sai. Ew, it's Cult Master Li, a damned old man. Ew, it's not okay even if it was Granny Sai, she's the granny that raised me. Cold sweat rolled down Qin Mu's forehead as a heart devil was almost planted in his heart. He hurriedly shut his eyes. Cult Master Li walked towards the outskirts of the village, and the devil chi around the body grew heavier and heavier, the devil nature growing stronger and stronger. On the road in front of the woman stood a blind man with a bamboo cane. The two people made their moves almost at the same time. Among the sparks and flames, the outcome was decided in an instant. Energy surged forth in all directions, and numerous treasures that were lying all around the village were activated by the terrifying shockwave from the clash of the two people. A brilliant light shone as terrifying throbs bursts of it scattered all the clouds in the sky. Cult Master Li grabbed his chest and collapsed. Blind, my wife's cultivation is too weak, or else I wouldn't be inferior to you, I'd certainly be stronger than you. Blind propped himself on his bamboo cane and said indifferently, we had never exchanged blows before, so how do you know you'd be stronger than me? Qin Mu rushed into Granny Sai's room and fetched a human skin and old clothes to cover Cult Master Li. The old man turned back into an old woman and screamed, I don't want to be like this. I'm the most beautiful woman in the world, I don't want to be so ugly. I want to wear the most beautiful clothes and be the most beautiful woman. Old Ma hurried over and chanted the names of Buddha to suppress the devil nature, suppressing Cult Master Li entirely. After some time, Granny Sai regained her consciousness and thanked Old Ma. Apothecary immediately came forward to check on her injuries. After treating her, he said, Blind, you're too harsh. Mua, you are faster than me in refining pills, so you shall refine the spirit pills. Qin Mu acknowledged and refined spirit pills right away. Blind sighed. I had no choice but to be harsh. Granny Sai's cultivation is improving too fast, she's almost at life and death realm. Cult Master Li's primordial spirit must have fused well with her. Furthermore, Cult Master Li's unity technique is simply too strong. Granny Sai got up and consumed the spirit pills that Qin Mu had brought over. I'm fine, much better now. Village chief floated over and shook his head. Granny, it's lucky that you were in the village. If you were outside and Cult Master Li took over your body, I'm afraid you would have wrecked the country and ruined the people. His devil nature is extremely strong, so it's quite normal that he would bring great turmoil to this world. Even the Emperor wouldn't be able to hold himself back, and the entire Eternal Peace Empire would be ruined at the hands of Cult Master Li. Old Ma said, Your heart devil is becoming stronger and stronger, so dragging things out isn't an option any longer. My Buddhist skills aren't as profound as those of old Rulai, so maybe he could help you suppress Cult Master Li. Why don't you take a trip to Great Thunderclap Monastery? Butcher touched his face and discovered blood all over his hands. He had shaved his beard too fast and cut his face with his pig-slaughtering knife. However, at the time he had been too infatuated with Granny Sai's beauty, so he hadn't felt anything. Only when Granny Sai put on her old woman's skin once again did he come to realize what had happened and said in a hurry, "There's no time to lose, it's best if Granny sets off now. The longer you delay, the more danger we'll be in." Village chief coughed lightly, then said, "We will be going to Great Thunderclap Monastery to ask old Rulai to suppress Granny's devil nature and not to eradicate that place, so there's no need for too many people. Old Ma knows the way there so he must go, and Blind can ignore Granny's appearance so he needs to go as well. Mua is clever and has cultivated heavenly devil creation technique, so he can also help out, and he's proficient in the art of healing as well. You three shall accompany Granny to Great Thunderclap Monastery." His expression was grim when he said solemnly, "Remember, never let Cult Master Li run away, or else the world will be in utter chaos." Qin Mu, Old Ma, and Blind nodded in agreement. Even though Granny Sai was beautiful, she wouldn't use her beauty as a weapon. On the contrary, she knew her beauty was too deadly and took the initiative to cover up, dressing up ugly when meeting people. However, Cult Master Li was different. The heart of Heavenly Devil Cult's previous cult master was twisted. He loved Granny Sai too much and was envious of her beauty, which was why he wanted to become her. Furthermore, he had a different comprehension of great educational Heavenly Devil scriptures than Qin Mu. Even though Qin Mu had also received the same book, the same teachings from Woodcutter's Rock, and comprehended the same unity technique, he was influenced by everyone in the village since he was young. Even though his actions might be slightly recalcitrant, he still stood upright. Qin Mu's unity technique had Overlord Body 3 elixir technique as a foundation, which was very orthodox. Many spells and divine arts that many people viewed as from the devil path were executed righteously by him. Cult Master Li's unity technique was, however, pretty evil and had the impression of the devil path. Cult Master Li would also not let herself suffer from grievances by dressing ugly to meet people. On the contrary, she would flaunt her beauty and cause devastation to all living beings. The old cult master didn't care at all about the so-called overturning a city with a smile and overturning a country with another. Qin Mu went back into Granny Sai's room and fetched all the beast skins that she had collected. He put them in his Dao Tai sack, preparing for emergencies. Old Ma and Blind also packed their luggage. Blind's luggage was simple, a bamboo cane and a copper 8 divinatory symbol hanging from a fortune-telling banner. Old Ma, on the other hand, brought the memorial tablets of his wife and children. After kissing them, he placed them safely in his bundle. He wore a green Buddhist robe and looked like a traveling monk that had gone through great hardships. Granny Sai's Dao heart was still slightly unstable at times, acting up frequently. Old Ma could help her suppress Cult Master Li while Blind was there in case the suppression wasn't enough. He will then injure Cult Master Li, and Qin Mu would be in charge of treating the old woman. They walked out of the village, and Granny Sai laughed at herself. "I still need you guys to protect me, and even Mua has to help. However, with me being the previous saintess of the devil cult and old Rulai being the Buddha, will he lend a helping hand?" Old Ma didn't show any emotions on his face. "Old Rulai will help you. Cult Master Li is the previous cult master of Heavenly Devil Cult and is of the same seniority as old Rulai. Old Rulai will gain merit from subduing devils, and subduing a great devil such as Cult Master Li can aid him in his cultivation. Furthermore, Buddhas giving up their lives to rear devils is a common event." Qin Mu said worriedly, "I'm afraid that when they subdue Cult Master Li, they will subdue Granny as well. Old Rulai won't do so." Old Ma shook his head. "He has his own principles, and they are his path, his practices. Upon reaching a cultivation like his, he doesn't even have to keep his practices in mind, his actions will never step over his practice, that is what practice is." Qin Mu couldn't help being curious. Old Ma had such a deep grudge against old Rulai, but from his words, he still held great respect for old Rulai. This was not merely because old Rulai was once old Ma's master. There had to be something about that old monk that made people respect him. What I'm doubting is old Rulai's ability. Blind raised his head. Does old Rulai have the ability to suppress Cult Master Li? This old devil was once in existence on par with him. No one said anything after this. Among the 3 sacred grounds of the martial world, there was Tao Sect, Great Thunderclap Monastery, and Heavenly Devil Cult. As the previous cult master of Heavenly Devil Cult, Cult Master Li was a top figure in the martial world and on par with old Rulai. If old Rulai wanted to refine him, it would be quite difficult. Great Thunderclap Monastery lies at the borders of Great Ruins and Eternal Peace Empire, Old Ma said. Legend says that God-broken mountain range was the mountain range sliced apart by a god, creating a natural chasm between Great Ruins and Eternal Peace. Great Thunderclap Monastery has a similar legend, but it has something extra. When the god slashed and his attack came near Mount Meru, there were monks sitting on the mountain. They filled the entire mountain and pledged to die and live with Mount Meru. The god saw their sincerity and took a detour around Mount Meru. All other mountain ranges were sliced apart, with only Mount Meru saved from damage. Blind smiled. I feel that there was someone above Mount Meru, or else the god wouldn't have cared one whit about the lives of the monks on the mountain. Mount Meru lay at the border of Great Ruins and Eternal Peace Empire. One side was to the Empire, and the other to Great Ruins. The sacred mountain was quite a distance away from Eternal Border and Secret Waters. It was, however, not very far from Qin Mu Pass of the northern borders. It was only a journey of 4,000 to 5,000 miles. The distance from disabled elderly village to Mount Meru was 30,000 miles. Qin Mu was much slower than Granny Sai, Old Ma, and Blind, so they had to take 6 to 7 days to reach there. The nights at Great Ruins were extremely dangerous, so they could only hurry throughout the day, because of which they took a bit longer than they would have done elsewhere. If they flew through the air, they could reach the place in 2 days, but Qin Mu's cultivation wasn't high enough for that. They would have to stop to rest and recover his vital qi after every 100 miles if he ran at full strength, so it was better to travel on land instead. Qin Mu brought the Dragon Chileen as a mode of transport. The Dragon Chileen could barely match the speed of Old Ma and the rest, so they didn't have to slow down because of him. When first evening came, they reached an ancient temple which was desolate and uninhabited. There were some strange beasts inside, but they ignored them, continuing to lie lazily beside a statue of the Heavenly King. Nua, come and pay your respect. Blind took out a few sticks of incense and waved for Qin Mu to come over. The 2 people, one young and one old, immediately to the front of the Heavenly King's statue and stabbed a couple sticks of incense in the broken censer before taking 3 steps back. They then prayed in one voice. This little one is from disabled elderly village which is located near the river. I have come across your temple and would like to rest my legs here for the time being. If I have alarmed the owner of this land, I am deeply sorry. Since he was young, this little one had weak kidneys and a frail body. My primordial yang has long since dispersed. Ua! Granny Sai groaned. In anger, she then added, Blind, you have taught Mua bad. Blind laughed. Granny Sai, you might not be afraid of being plucked, but we are. If you don't believe, you can ask Mua if the prayers I taught him worked. Qin Mu nodded repeatedly. They work. When Xiangqinga heard my prayers, she didn't pluck me. Granny Sai didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She called Mua over. Come and help me cook. After Qin Mu walked over, she said secretly, Blind is full of bad ideas, don't always learn from him. When night descended, the surroundings of the Heavenly King's temple were very silent. There was no sound around, besides the Dragon Chileen's snores. Old Ma sat upright like a Buddha, while Blind leaned on his bamboo cane as he sat against a wall, his head lowered in sleep. Unlike them, Qin Mu had used dried grass to prepare 2 beds, and Granny Sai slept beside him. In the dead of the night, the beating of gongs and drums suddenly resounded from outside. Everyone in the temple immediately became alert, and Qin Mu sat up to look around, but only saw darkness. The candles in the temple were still giving off a dim light, but the beatings of gongs and drums were very clear, coming closer and closer. Blind and Old Ma immediately came to Qin Mu and Granny Sai's side, and Old Ma motioned them to stay quiet. The beating of gongs and drums grew closer and closer until they came to the front of the temple. A few deep voices then called out, "Silence! Challenge!" A couple of god statues came walking into the temple while wearing worn-out armor. Even though the stone statues were dilapidated, they were like living gods, and Qin Mu even smelled the stench of rot from them. These stone statues were majestic, and the 100 white skeletons behind them were soldiers holding onto broken weapons, lining up in a perfect manner. A few of the soldiers held gongs and drums in their bony hands, while a few others were carrying banners with words, "Silence" and "Challenge." The stone statues walked into the temple while the white skeletons remained outside. Qin Mu stared wide-eyed at such an absurd scene in front of him. The dragon Qilin had also woken up and was yawning. A human voice actually came from a god statue which said to the Heavenly King's god statue in the temple, reporting to Sea Suppression Heavenly King, East Sea Dragon King Aocean is using the natural disaster to rebel. His Majesty sent me orders from Carefree Village to come forth and assist Sea Suppression Heavenly King to slay the rebel. The dragon Qilin was lying under the feet of the Heavenly King's god statue, but he was still in a daze and didn't know what was happening. At that moment, the tall and sturdy Heavenly King's god statue moved. The 8 flags behind it fluttered, and the stone statue trembled before standing up. With an abnormal or inspiring authority, it shouted out, "For 20,000 years has this disaster plagued us, and this fellow still dares to rebel. Bring me my sword." The resounding sound of a sword coming out of its sheath came from the back of the Heavenly King's temple. A green dragon crescent blade that was 30 yards long broke out from the dirt behind the temple and came whooshing over. The Heavenly King's god statue grabbed onto the blade with his hand, and the sword hummed. "Where's my steed?" that Heavenly King's god statue shouted. The dragon Qilin finally came to his senses when he suddenly felt himself sinking down as the Heavenly King's god statue sat down on him. The dragon's body rose uncontrollably and flew out of the temple. The dragon Qilin was indescribably appalled when it heard the booming voice of the Heavenly King's god statue coming from his back. "You guys shall stay to guard this place, I'll return after I've slain him." After the orders were said, the dragon Qilin turned into a trail of flames against his wool and disappeared into the darkness while carrying the Heavenly King's god statue. Instead of saying he was carrying that god statue, it could be said that the Heavenly King's god statue was bringing him along, as he absolutely couldn't carry the Heavenly King's god statue. In the temple, Qin Mu, Granny Sai, Blind, and Old Ma were dumbfounded, unable to speak a word for quite a while. Later, they looked at one another in dismay. It was hard to say how much time had passed, but they reckoned that dawn was already coming. At that moment, a dragon's roar rang in the air. There was a huge crash, and a dragon's head fell down from the pitch-black night sky, tumbling 2 rounds in the courtyard of the Heavenly King's temple. Qin Mu immediately looked over, but this dragon's head was sculpted from stone and not a real dragon's head. The roars of dragons rang endlessly as the Heavenly King's god statue flew back while riding on the dragon Qilin. He jumped off and sat down on the lotus platform in the temple. After placing his green dragon crescent blade by his side, he said, "You guys can report back to His Majesty that by good luck this general was able to accomplish the mission and severed the head of the rebel." Once the stone statues received their orders, they turned around to enter the darkness, bringing with them the army of white skeletons. As they disappeared into the darkness, the beating the gongs and drums also gradually faded away. Some time later, the crowing of roosters could be heard, and the darkness retreated into the distance. The sun rose into the sky and shone into the Heavenly King's temple. Qin Mu shook his head. This night had been like an extremely weird dream. He looked at the dragon Qilin, who was still in a daze, and asked immediately, "Fatty dragon, how are you?" "I had a dream," the muddle-headed dragon Qilin said. "I dreamed that I carried a god king that gave off glorious flames. We slaughtered our way into a battlefield over a roaring sea as countless divine dragons attacked me. However, they were all slain by the blade of that god king on my back. I carried him into the sea, and we slaughtered our way through a bunch of dragon gods and severed the head of one of the dragon kings, then left after taking his head. This dream was so real." Qin Mu looked at Blind and Old Ma before asking softly, "Grandpa Blind, do you think what happened yesterday night was real?" Blind and Old Ma shook their heads. Who can be sure about the incidents in Great Ruins? Let us hurry on our way. Heading to Great Thunderclap Monastery is more important. Qin Mu stared at the Heavenly King's god statue in a daze, feeling something abnormal about everything here. He went forward and stretched his hand out to touch the stone statue, but it was ice cold and not made of flesh and blood. His Majesty sent his orders from Carefree Village. His orders from Carefree Village. Qin Mu had a complicated expression as he muttered to himself, where exactly is Carefree Village? This video will end here.